The wind cut across the open prairie like a blade, stirring dust into golden spirals that danced under the dying light of the sun. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the fiery sky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held both storms and secrets. The townsfolk whispered about him in the saloons and along dusty streets, calling him QAnon Blackwood, a man as mysterious as the canyon winds. But none of the stories could capture what he was about to face. The camera of imagination zooms in on a small, ramshackle town, dry, sun-bleached, and forgotten by time. It's the kind of place where strangers are watched with suspicion, and every gesture can mean the difference between life and death. Here, fate had drawn together two lives that seemed destined never to cross. One was Canaan, the rugged wanderer whose past was etched into the lines of his weathered face. The other was Tokoda, a young Apache warrior, silent but fierce, with a gaze that could pierce through the bravest of men. Neither knew it yet, but a single act of kindness, one small gesture, would spark a bond that would change everything. As Canaan entered the town, his horse's hooves thudding against the wooden boardwalk, the sound echoed like a warning. The saloon doors swung open with a creak, and curious eyes turned to study him. He wasn't here for trouble, at least, not the kind that comes with gunfire and brawls. He had come in search of something more elusive, redemption perhaps, or simply a place to belong in a world that had given him little mercy. The first 30 seconds of the journey had already set the stage for tension. You can almost feel the brush of danger in the air, the whispers in the wind. The possibility that any step might be the one that tips everything into chaos. It's the perfect time for you, dear viewer, to hit like and subscribe to Western Love Story, so you never miss the twists that lie ahead in this tale of courage and unexpected friendship. Canaan made his way to the watering hole at the edge of town, a small wooden trough beside a crumbling fence. There, he saw the first hint of what his journey would demand. A boy, barely more than a child, struggling to guide a frightened horse. The child's eyes were wide with both fear and determination. And behind him, emerging from the shadows of the nearby canyon, came Tokoda. He was tall and imposing, the kind of presence that drew respect without a word. His every move carried the weight of his people's history, the Apache warriors who had survived against impossible odds. Canaan watched for a moment, hidden behind his hat, the sun casting long shadows across his face. He saw Tokoda reach out to the boy with caution, a gesture so small, yet so full of meaning. And something in QAnon stirred a memory he had long tried to bury. Stepped forward, uncertain if he was intruding or being pulled by fate. The air between them crackled with unspoken questions. Could a man hardened by years of wandering, a warrior shaped by tradition, and a town wary of strangers ever find common ground? The town, with its dusty streets and weathered facades, seemed alive with anticipation. Windows rattled as the wind blew, and dogs barked at shadows. Inside the saloon, laughter and the clinking of glasses masked an undercurrent of suspicion. People had long grown wary of outsiders, and a stranger with a story written in scars drew both curiosity and caution. Canaan's first words to Tokoda were measured, deliberate, a careful thread cast into uncertain waters. "Need a hand?" he asked, and though the question was simple, the weight behind it was immense. Tokoda's eyes, dark and unreadable, lingered on him. He studied Canaan's hands, calloused and steady, hands that had known both violence and survival. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The world seemed to pause, the wind, the sun, even the distant mountains holding their breath. Then, with a nod almost imperceptible, Tokoda accepted the gesture. It was a moment that neither man could yet define, but both would carry forever. One small gesture, one spark of connection, and a story that could have remained divided by mistrust and pride began to unfold. Canaan's presence did not go unnoticed. A group of townsfolk gathered near the edge of the street, curious eyes peering from behind crates and doorways. They whispered, speculating whether the newcomer was friend or foe. And in the quiet corners, others felt the undercurrent of something extraordinary. For the first time in years, the town's rhythm shifted not with gunfire or fear, but with the possibility of trust. Tokoda guided the boy and the horse toward the edge of the canyon, and Canaan followed. The sunlight turned the rocks into molten gold, shadows stretching like long-forgotten memories. Here, amid the rugged beauty and silent danger, They exchanged no grand speeches, no promises written in ink, just actions, small, deliberate, meaningful. A hand extended, a nod of respect, a shared glance that said more than words ever could. And yet danger lingered. Somewhere beyond the hills, a threat moved with quiet menace. Old rivalries, unspoken grudges, and the harsh law of survival waited patiently, ready to test the fragile trust forming between them. Kanan could feel it, the subtle shift of wind carrying the scent of trouble. Takoda sensed it too, his hand resting near the carved hilt of a knife, his stance taut like a coiled spring. It was a reminder that in this land, friendship was never free of risk, and trust had to be earned with every step. In this tense calm, the story of their unlikely bond began. The friendship that would challenge prejudices, confront dangers, ultimately change the course of lives began not with grand gestures or heroic feats, but with something far simpler and far more powerful. A willingness to see another human being, to acknowledge their struggle, and to extend a hand. It was a lesson as old as the prairies themselves, yet as vital as the air that stirred the dust around their boots. The town watched, silent yet alert. Windows reflected the last rays of sunlight, and shadows stretched long across the boardwalks. Kanan and Takoda stood together, a man of wandering roads and a warrior of timeless heritage, united by a gesture that carried the weight of destiny. Their story was only beginning, and the echoes of the past whispered through the canyons, hinting at trials that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their hearts. And just when it seemed that the prairie might hold its breath a little longer, a distant horn shattered the quiet. A rider approached at speed, dust rising like a warning signal. Kanan's eyes narrowed, Takoda's hand tensed. Whatever awaited them beyond the horizon would challenge everything they had just begun to build. The stage was set for a tale of loyalty, courage, and friendship that no one could have predicted. In that moment, every step mattered. Every choice could change the outcome, and the fragile bond forged by a small gesture faced its first real test. Would QAnon and Takoda survive the coming storm? Could trust bridge the gap between two very different worlds? The answers lay just beyond the next ridge, hidden in the rolling prairie and the uncertain paths that lay ahead. One small gesture had begun a friendship that could change everything, but only if they could survive the trials waiting just out of sight. Stay tuned, because this story, brought to life by Western Love Story, is only just beginning. Hit like and subscribe now to follow QAnon and Takoda as they navigate danger, uncover secrets, and forge a bond that will redefine the meaning of friendship in the wild, untamed American frontier. The rider approached fast, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled around the canyon like spirits of the past. Kanan's grip tightened on the reins, his eyes scanning the horizon with the precision of a man who had learned to read danger like an open book. Takoda, silent as the shadow behind him, moved with a fluid, predatory grace, every muscle coiled and ready. The stranger was unfamiliar, yet there was a weight to him, a presence that demanded attention. The wind carried the sound of hooves before the figure emerged, clearly a messenger, perhaps, or a harbinger of trouble. Kanan's mind raced. He had wandered many lands, faced bandits, storms, and betrayal, yet the unease he felt now was different. It wasn't just the rider's speed or the urgency in his approach. It was the way the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Takoda's eyes followed the newcomer with sharp intensity, reading the tension in every line of his body. There was a history here, unspoken yet heavy, and both men could feel its weight pressing against them. The rider slowed just enough to throw a message, a folded piece of weathered parchment, directly into Kanan's path. The paper fluttered and landed near his boot, and he picked it up carefully, reading the inked words written in hurried, almost desperate strokes. It spoke of raids, of missing people, of shadows moving through the night like they had no master but the wind. Whoever had sent this warning clearly feared for their life. Kanan, for all his guarded nature, felt the gravity of it settle into his chest. Takoda glanced at him without a word. His eyes, dark and inscrutable, reflected not only his own concern, but also the weight of his ancestors, who had always known the harshness of the frontier. The Apache warrior had survived more than most men could endure, guided by the code of his people, honor, courage, and a connection to the land that ran deeper than roots. Yet even he recognized that something in the message hinted at forces beyond the ordinary, a storm gathering quietly, poised to strike. Kanan folded the parchment with care, the wind tugging at its edges. "Seems trouble doesn't waste time," he murmured, his voice low but steady. Takada's hand moved instinctively toward his knife, a subtle but powerful gesture that spoke volumes. They had yet to speak of themselves in detail, yet each could read the other like a map. Understanding more in gestures and glances than most men could in hours of conversation. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the landscape changed. Jagged rocks rose like ancient sentinels, shadows stretching long and ominous in the late afternoon sun. The sound of the wind became sharper here, whistling through cracks and crevices as if carrying whispers from the past. Takada paused, scanning the horizon. "This land," he said finally, his voice calm yet layered with history, "has seen much blood, and not all of it belongs to those who call it home." Kanan nodded, understanding immediately. He had seen it himself, the way settlers had carved towns into the wilderness, claiming rivers, hills, and canyons as their own, often leaving little but scars behind. Takada's words were not just observation. They were warning. Every canyon held secrets, some buried for decades, some still fresh, waiting to resurface at the wrong moment. And here, in this forgotten stretch of the prairie, the danger was as much in what they could see as in what they could not. The boy from earlier trailed behind, his small frame tense as he navigated the rocky paths. Kanan's eyes softened as he glanced at him. "He's got spirit," Kanan said quietly. "More than most adults I've seen." Takada gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of the boy's courage, yet his expression remained unreadable. In Takada's world, courage was not just about facing immediate threats. It was about surviving when the odds were stacked against you, about keeping your honor intact when the world pushed to tear it away. Night began to creep over the canyon, and the first stars pierced the indigo sky. They stopped near a shallow creek, the water glinting like scattered jewels in the fading light. Kanan unsaddled his horse, his movements deliberate, careful, while Takada settled beside the boy, sharpening a small knife with the precision of a master. There was an unspoken understanding here. The night would bring danger, whether in the form of men, wild animals, or the unseen shadows that moved through the land like restless spirits. They were preparing, not with alarm, but with respect for the trials that lay ahead. Kanan's eyes drifted toward the distant horizon, where the last light of the sun kissed the canyon walls. Memories he had long buried stirred days of loss, moments of betrayal, and fleeting times of kindness that had left a mark on him stronger than any wound. He thought of the small gestures that had once altered the course of his life, and how even now a single act could shift everything. It was this thought that bound him, invisibly, to Takada. They were two men of different worlds, brought together by circumstance and a simple, shared act of humanity. Takada's voice broke the silence, low but resonant. "You've carried much, Kanan. Your eyes speak of battles no one should face alone." Kanan flinched slightly, surprised at the accuracy of the observation. The Apache had a way of seeing beneath the surface, reading more than just appearances. Finally replied, his voice rough but steady. "And you've carried the weight of generations. I can see that in your stance, your silence, your caution." The boy, sensing the gravity of the conversation, stayed silent, though his eyes darted between the two men. He could feel the tension, the undercurrent of history and hardship that flowed like a river between them. And in that silence, the canyon seemed to listen to every rustle of leaves, every distant howl of a coyote, part of the unspoken story being written in real time. As darkness fully settled, they made a small camp, lighting a fire that cast flickering shadows across the canyon walls. The flames danced in their eyes, highlighting the determination etched in their features. They spoke little, for words often fell short of the truths they carried. Instead, they shared presence, a bond forming in quiet understanding. Trust growing not from speech, but from the acknowledgement of shared purpose and mutual respect. Yet the tension remained. The rider's message was a thread pulling them toward a confrontation yet unseen. Somewhere beyond the jagged edges of the canyon, forces were already moving, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night brought with it the scent of uncertainty, the possibility of betrayal, and the inevitability that this fragile friendship born from one small gesture would be tested in ways neither could imagine. Kanan stared into the fire, the glow reflecting in his eyes. He wondered about the journey ahead, the choices he would face, and the shadows that had begun to gather. Tokuda, sitting opposite him, seemed equally absorbed, his expression unreadable, yet heavy with thought. The bond forming between them was new, yet its significance was undeniable. They were no longer two men merely crossing paths. They were part of a story that demanded courage, loyalty, and an unflinching willingness to face the unknown together. Morning would come soon, bringing light and clarity, but also the reality of the challenges ahead. For now, the night held them in suspense, a pause between past and future, between fear and hope. Every sound in the canyon seemed magnified, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a hawkitch, a reminder that the frontier was alive, unpredictable, and unforgiving. And just as sleep began to beckon, a distant cry split the night, a voice carrying urgency, pain, and warning. Kanan rose instinctively, his hand on the hilt of his revolver. Tokuda was already moving, silent as the wind, eyes scanning the shadows. The boy clutched his blanket, wide-eyed, sensing the shift in the world around him. Whatever had been stirring beyond the canyon had finally revealed itself, and the fragile trust between these two men would now be tested in ways that neither time nor preparation could fully anticipate. The night seemed to stretch infinitely, every sound magnified, every shadow holding possibility. Kanan and Tokuda stood side by side, one small gesture away from history, one decision away from danger that could change everything. The frontier had always been a place of uncertainty, where lives were measured in choices, courage, and the strength to face what was coming. And now, as the wind whispered through the canyon, carried with it a promise. The friendship born in shadow and fire would face trials beyond imagination, yet it had the potential to become something enduring, something that could shape the course of more than just their lives. The story paused on the edge of action, waiting for the dawn that would bring both clarity and challenge. The unresolved tension hung heavy in the canyon air, a reminder that the frontier never sleeps, that danger is never far, and that one small gesture could indeed ignite a friendship strong enough to alter the course of destiny itself. The journey had just begun, and the path ahead was as uncertain as the shifting sands of the prairie, holding secrets, threats, and the promise of a bond that could withstand even the harshest trials. The dawn arrived slowly, painting the canyon in muted shades of orange and gray. Kanan stirred first, his eyes scanning the horizon where the wind carried hints of movement. Tokuda was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the dying embers of the fire, his knife laid across his lap, hands steady, eyes alert. The boy, whose name Kanan had learned was Elias, peeked from behind a boulder, shivering in the morning chill. Something had unsettled the night, and even the light could not chase it away. As they mounted their horses, the message from the previous day weighed on Kanan's mind. The raids, the disappearances, the hint of shadowed figures moving unseen, it was all connected, though. How was still unclear. Tokuda rode beside him silently, his expression unreadable, yet every movement spoke of readiness. The Apache warrior had survived ambushes, storms, and battles that would have broken most men. And still, he sensed the same tension in the canyon that Kanan did. The land itself was alive with warning. They reached the ridge overlooking the small town. From this vantage point, the full scope of the problem became visible. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and horses stirred nervously in the corral. The townspeople went about their early tasks, yet a subtle anxiety threaded through the scene, as if they too felt the approaching storm. Kanan's sharp eyes picked out a man moving through the streets with an unusual purpose, his gait cautious but determined. Tokuda's hand tightened near the knife at his side. "Watch the shadows," he said quietly. They moved faster than the wind. Kanan studied the figure, sensing layers he could not yet name. There was a tension in the air, the kind that hinted at old grudges and new dangers intertwining. As they descended toward the town, they passed the creek where they had camped, its waters reflecting a sky that promised both light and conflict. Tokuda's gaze remained fixed ahead. "There are stories buried here," he said, voice low. "Stories that men forget, but the land remembers. And those stories are waking." Inside the town, whispers followed them like ghosts. Kanan noticed it immediately. Windows shut quickly. Doors closed with a thud and eyes peering cautiously from the shadows. There were factions here, old rivalries between settlers and newcomers, between men who had claimed the land and those who refused to bend to its rules. The boy Elias stayed close to Tokoda, sensing the unspoken danger that seemed to surround them. It was more than just the man in the streets. They were stepping into a network of tension, where one misstep could ignite conflict that had been simmering for years. Their first stop was the general store, where the bell over the door jingled lightly, though the atmosphere inside was thick with unease. The storekeeper, a thin man named Harlan Quinn, glanced at them as if they carried the weight of a coming storm. "Kanan," he said, voice low, "you're not just wandering this time. Trouble's moving closer. People are disappearing near the ridge. The sheriff can't keep up." Tokoda leaned slightly forward, observing every word. There was more beneath Harlan's tone than panic. It was a warning. Kanan's eyes flicked toward the rear of the store. There, half hidden, was the rider from the previous day, the one who had thrown the message. He now moved with purpose, checking the corners, his posture tense. Something about him suggested that the warnings were not just words, they were prophecy in motion. "We need to know everything," Kanan said to Harlan. "Start from the beginning. Every detail matters." Harlan hesitated, then nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "People have vanished near the old canyon mines, miners mostly. They speak of figures in the shadows, strange symbols carved in the rocks. No one dares go after them." Tokoda's eyes narrowed. The mines were dangerous enough on their own, but this hinted at something beyond ordinary lawlessness. There was history, ancient, hidden, and possibly deadly. Kanan felt the weight of the responsibility settling over him. He had wandered far enough to know that danger often chose the unwary, and now it had chosen them. "Then we go to the mines," he said, his voice steady, "and we find the truth ourselves." As they prepared for the trek, the townsfolk murmured among themselves, some offering quiet warnings, others expressing thinly veiled suspicion. In this town, loyalty was measured in actions, not words. A single misstep could alienate allies and invite enemies. Kanan and Tokoda, despite the bond forming between them, felt the gaze of history pressing down. This was not merely a journey into the wilderness, it was a journey into the heart of fear, secrecy, and human ambition. The ride to the mines was tense, with the sun climbing higher and shadows stretching long across the rocky terrain. Tokoda remained vigilant, his instincts honed by generations of survival, while Kanan's mind analyzed every potential threat. They spoke little, understanding that silence could often communicate more than words. Elias, sensing the gravity, stayed close, his small hands gripping the reins as if holding on to courage itself. When they arrived at the edge of the canyon where the mines lay, the air shifted. It was a smell, faint but distinct smoke, mixed with something metallic, blood mingling with iron. The entrance to the mine was dark, jagged, and foreboding, and carved symbols lined the rocks around it. Koda's eyes lingered on the patterns, tracing them with a subtle motion of his fingers. "These are not random," he whispered. "They speak of warning, of danger, and of those who came before, who did not leave." Kanan stepped closer, the weight of the revolver at his hip grounding him. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity demanded that he see beyond the obvious. The subplots of the town, the missing miners, and the whispered threats converged here. And lurking beyond the shadows, something watched, silent, patient, and calculating. Suddenly, a noise echoed from within the Mina shift of rocks, a faint but deliberate movement. The boy stiffened, his eyes wide with fear, while Tokoda's hand flew to the knife. Kanan raised his revolver, scanning the darkness. "Stay close," he commanded softly. "Whatever's in there is waiting, and we'll give it a reason to regret that choice." The tension thickened as they entered the mine, each step echoing against the stone walls. The light from their torches flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of their source. Dust and age mingled in the air, creating a haze that obscured the deeper passageways. Kanan could feel the weight of history pressing down the miners who had disappeared. The warnings of the townsfolk and the silent vigilance of Tokoda, all converging in this single place. A faint whisper, almost carried by the wind, drifted through the tunnel. Elias gasped softly, but Tokoda's presence remained a steady anchor. "Listen," he said quietly. "The past speaks here, if you know how to hear. Every sound, the drip of water, the distant echo of stone shifting, the scrape of metal against rocks seemed amplified, warning them of the dangers ahead. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, a subtle shake that could have been ignored by a casual observer. Kanan froze, then took a cautious step forward, the tremor repeating. Takoda knelt, placing his hand lightly on the ground, his expression grim. "They are not far," he said. "And they are watching. Every move we make will be noted." Outside the mine, the town stirred with its own subplots. Harlan Quinn and a few brave townsfolk debated whether to follow or stay hidden. The sheriff, overwhelmed and wary, had sent no help, leaving Kanan, Dakota, and Elias to face what awaited alone. This created a secondary tension, the feeling of isolation in the face of danger. The knowledge that allies were uncertain, and that every decision carried consequence not just for them, but for the entire town. Deeper in the mine, shadows seemed to shift like living things. The carvings on the walls grew more intricate, almost telling a story of warning and power. Kanan's pulse quickened, aware that they were entering a web of history, superstition, and danger. Dakota's quiet vigilance never wavered, his senses attuned to every flicker of movement. Elias trembled slightly, but remained close, held steady by the trust he had begun to place in these two men. The tension reached a crescendo as a sudden scrape echoed from deeper within the mine, louder, more deliberate. Kanan and Dakota froze, knowing that whatever was waiting had acknowledged them. The darkness ahead seemed alive, almost breathing, and the air grew colder. They exchanged a glance, silent agreement passing between them. They would proceed together. United by a bond forged from a single act of trust, yet tested now by forces neither fully understood. And then, from the far end of the tunnel, a faint glow appeared, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. It was not natural, not from torchlight or fire. The shadows danced around it, casting shapes that seemed to move independently. Whatever lay ahead had a purpose, and it was drawing them forward, deeper into the unknown. The story held its breath at this moment. Outside, the prairie wind continued its restless song. Within the mine, the trio advanced, each step measured, each heartbeat a drumbeat of suspense. The main conflict was no longer abstract. It was tangible, it's alive and waiting, to test courage, loyalty, and the fragile bond that had begun with one small gesture. The glow deep within the mine pulsed like a heartbeat, and with every step Kanan took, the walls seemed to close in closer, whispering secrets of danger and betrayal. Tokuda moved silently beside him, his eyes never leaving the shifting shadows, reading the space with a precision born of generations of survival. Elias followed, his small hand gripping the strap of his satchel, courage held in trembling fingers. None of them spoke. Words would only break the fragile calm that held the tension in place like a taut wire ready to snap. The glow grew brighter, revealing symbols etched deep into the stone, some jagged, some flowing in curves that hinted at rituals long forgotten. Tokuda reached out, tracing a symbol with the tip of his knife, his brow furrowed. "These are warnings," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Men came here before, seeking more than gold or work. They took what did not belong to them, and the land remembers." Kanan's pulse quickened. He had faced greed, betrayal, and violence in many forms, but the mix of superstition and real danger here made the stakes unpredictable. A sudden scrape echoed from the far tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling in tiny motes, sparkling in the eerie glow. Elias jumped slightly, clutching Kanan's arm. Dakota crouched low, eyes scanning. The scrape was deliberate, calculated, like the movement of a predator testing its prey. Kanan whispered, "Stay calm. They want to see fear." The boy nodded, swallowing hard, while Takuda's stance radiated control, a quiet command for courage without words. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed, forcing them to proceed in single file. Each step echoed, bouncing off the stone walls like a warning drum. Kanan's revolver rested ready at his hip, but the shadows here were unpredictable. Threats could strike from places no weapon could reach in time. Tokuda's knife gleamed faintly, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. Elias, though small and inexperienced, stayed close, trusting these two men who had already risked everything for him with nothing but instinct and honesty. Then, a low growl echoed from deeper in the mine, vibrating through the rock beneath their boots. The glow shifted, revealing figures that seemed almost human yet unnerving in their movement. They advanced slowly, their steps synchronized, their intentions unclear but unmistakably dangerous. Kanan's heart pounded. Dakota signaled for silence, reading the figures with eyes trained over years of stealth and combat. Whoever or whatever they were, the danger was immediate and lethal. Suddenly, one figure lunged forward from the shadows. Kanan fired, the crack of the revolver echoing through the tunnel. The figure disappeared into darkness, but the sound had broken the stillness. Dakota moved like lightning, intercepting another who tried to flank Elias. The boy froze for a moment, fear gripping him, but Dakota's calm hand on his shoulder steadied him. "Move with us, not against," the warrior instructed, his voice low and commanding. Kanan's mind raced. The danger was more than chance someone had orchestrated this, and the missing miners were only the beginning. The subplots they had glimpsed from the town, the whispers, the unexplained disappearances, the warnings carved in the rocks all converged into one unavoidable truth. The mine held secrets that others would kill to protect. And now, these men, cloaked in shadows, were willing to fight anyone who interfered. The tunnel forked, and Dakota chose the left path, moving with the quiet confidence of one who knows the land better than anyone else. Kanan followed, revolver raised, senses alert to every shift in shadow and light. Elias trailed behind, his small frame moving quickly to keep up. As they rounded a bend, the glow intensified, and the figures multiplied. Some emerged from hidden crevices, while others seemed to rise from the floor itself. The tension was unbearable. Every step could be the one that ended everything. Dakota's voice broke the silence again. "They test us. Every warrior before has faltered here, and the land remembers their mistakes. We must not." Kanan nodded, feeling the weight of history pressing down, yet also the weight of responsibility to protect the boy and the town they had promised to defend. He adjusted his grip on the revolver, his eyes scanning, calculating, waiting for the right moment to act. From another tunnel, a sharp metallic clang echoed a warning. Someone was setting traps. Kanan's pulse spiked. "They're clever," he muttered under his breath. Dakota's eyes met his understanding without words. "We need to move faster but carefully," the Apache said. "Every wrong step brings danger closer." Elias swallowed hard, clinging to the warrior's side. The fear was palpable, but so was the trust growing in each heartbeat, forged through the small gestures that had started this journey. The figures ahead moved closer, shadows stretching unnaturally in the flickering light. One lunged suddenly, a knife glinting. Dakota intercepted, parrying with precise skill, twisting the attacker's arm and disarming him in one fluid motion. Kanan fired again, keeping the remaining shadows at bay, while Elias ducked instinctively, holding on to the hope that they would survive. The tunnel became a labyrinth of tension, every sound amplified, every movement charged with potential disaster. A sudden roar echoed from the deepest part of the mine, shaking dust from the ceiling. The attackers froze for a heartbeat, as if startled, giving Kanan and Dakota a brief advantage. The boy's eyes widened, realizing that the danger they faced was not merely human. The roar repeated, closer this time, vibrating through the stone like a living warning. Something ancient and powerful lingered in these mines, awakened by the intrusion of the living. Kanan took a steadying breath. "Dakota, we can't turn back now, not when we're this close." The Apache nodded, eyes dark with resolve. "Then we face it together." The boy, sensing their determination, clenched his fists and straightened his back. For all his fear, he knew that they were his protectors and guides, and that courage could be learned in moments like these. The tunnel opened into a cavern larger than anything QAnon had imagined, its walls lined with glittering minerals and jagged rock. In the center, the glow pulsed brighter, revealing a cluster of figures encircling an object partially hidden beneath a cloth. The symbols carved into the surrounding rocks now seemed alive, almost humming with energy. The tension was at its peak. Every instinct screamed that this was the point where everything would change. One figure stepped forward, taller than the others, with eyes as cold as steel. Kanan recognized authority in his stance and cruelty in his intent. "Who dares enter?" the man demanded, his voice carrying across the cavern like thunder. Takoda stepped forward, placing himself between the boy and the danger. "We seek truth," he said evenly, eyes unwavering, "and we will not be turned aside." The crowd shifted, murmuring in agreement or dissent. Kanan felt the culmination of everything: the town's whispers, the miners' disappearances, the symbols, the traps all converging in this single electrified moment. Elias gripped Takoda's arm, heart racing, but his trust unwavering. This was the edge of the unknown, the point where the conflicts they had encountered would either explode or bend to the courage they had gathered. A sudden movement from the side caught Kanan's attention. Another shadowy figure tried to circle them, but Takoda intercepted with a fluid motion, taking control with skill that seemed almost supernatural. Kanan fired a warning shot, the echo rattling through the cavern. Every second stretched endlessly. Every breath, every heartbeat was a drum of suspense. The tension was unbearable, yet electric. Kanan's eyes flicked to the object beneath the cloth. Whatever it was, it radiated a force that demanded attention. The reason the figures had gathered, and the reason the land seemed to hum with anticipation. Takoda's gaze remained fixed on the approaching threats, ready to act, while Elias clutched his side, knowing that the outcome of this confrontation would define more than just their survival. It would shape the friendship that had begun with a single gesture and the future of the town itself. Then, a final roar reverberated through the cavern, closer, stronger. Dust fell in sheets, and the figures hesitated, their unity cracking under the presence of something greater than themselves. Takoda shifted slightly, signaling that they were close to a tipping point. Kanan's grip tightened on the revolver, and he took a slow breath. They were poised on the edge of action, every second stretching, every shadow threatening, every heartbeat counting down to the moment where courage would meet consequence. And then silence. The glow pulsed one last time, bathing the cavern in golden light, as if holding its breath. Every figure froze, the tension unbearable, the stakes clear. Takoda and Elias stood at the center of history, facing threats that tested their strength, their trust, and their courage. Every whisper from the past, every warning in the symbols, and every shadowed figure pointed to the same truth. The resolution of this conflict would require more than weapons. It would demand heart, trust, and the bond that had grown from one small gesture. The cavern seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the land itself waited to see what would happen next. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the promise of dawn, danger, and hope. And inside, the three stood together, united by trust, courage, and a friendship that had begun in silence, but was now tested at the edge of everything. The story paused at its peak, every shadow, every movement, every heartbeat suspended. The audience could feel it: the anticipation, the tension, the unknown that lay just beyond reach. The climax was near, the answers awaited, but the final resolution remained unseen. A heartbeat away, keeping hearts racing and minds caught in the edge of suspense. The cavern held its breath as the glow pulsed one last time, the figures frozen in place, shadows stretching across the jagged walls. Kanan's eyes narrowed, reading the tension, the danger, the unspoken threat surrounding them. Takoda stepped forward, calm and deliberate, letting the quiet command of his presence speak louder than words. Elias stayed close, small but resolute, the trust he had placed in the two men anchoring him, even in the face of the unknown. The tall figure at the center of the shadows hesitated, their authority unshaken, but their certainty shaken by the courage before them. Kanan and Takoda moved as one, their actions deliberate, showing strength without recklessness. Kanan's hand rested lightly on the revolver, ready, but he did not strike first. Takoda's knife gleamed in the golden light, yet it was his stance, his unwavering resolve, that spoke the loudest. Sometimes, the strongest weapon was not fire or steel, but courage and purpose. Slowly, the figure stepped aside, as if recognizing that resistance here would only bring ruin. The other shadows followed, retreating into the deeper tunnels, their whispers fading like wind across the prairie. The glow began to fade, revealing the object beneath the cloth. Kanan carefully approached and lifted it, revealing a small chest, worn with age yet intact. Takoda moved beside him, eyes scanning, knowing that the danger might not have fully passed. Elias peered at the chest with wide eyes, sensing that this moment held the answers to all the fear, uncertainty, and tension that had haunted them. Inside the chest, they found tools, maps, and journals records left by miners who had vanished years ago, detailing their discoveries and their fears. These were not ordinary miners. They had stumbled upon secrets that men had tried to suppress, and it was those secrets that had drawn the shadowy figures into the mine. Takoda read through the symbols in the journals, connecting them with the carvings in the cavern. The mystery was unraveling, the danger now contained, and the path forward becoming clear. Kanan let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "We faced it," he said quietly, "and survived." Takoda nodded, his gaze still watchful, a silent reminder that vigilance had kept them alive. Elias let out a small laugh, relief flooding him after the fear of the night. The boy's courage, nurtured by trust and guidance, had grown in ways he could not yet fully understand. This bond, born from a small gesture, had proven stronger than any threat, and stronger than fear itself. They made their way back through the tunnels, carrying the journals and maps. Each step felt lighter, though the shadows still lingered faintly, reminders of the trials they had endured. When they emerged into the sunlight, the canyon stretched before them like a promise, wide and open, filled with the warmth of hope. The wind carried the scent of sage and earth, cleansing the tension that had built over days of uncertainty. Kanan allowed himself a small smile, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the simple survival of danger. Back in town, the townsfolk gathered to see the return of the trio. Kanan and Takoda explained the discoveries, the journals, and the warning signs that had been ignored for too long. Harlan Quinn, the storekeeper, listened in awe, his eyes wide with understanding. The sheriff nodded, now aware of the courage and insight that had brought clarity where fear and confusion had ruled. Elias stood beside Takoda, proud and confident, a symbol of the bond that had grown from trust, guidance, and protection. The shadowy figures were never fully understood. Their influence had been broken, their threat neutralized by courage, strategy, and unity. Kanan and Takoda, though different in every way, one a wanderer shaped by loss, the other a warrior guided by tradition, had shown that friendship, respect, and small gestures of trust could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The town itself seemed lighter, the tension dissipating as the truth became known, and the people realized that courage and unity could overcome fear. Takoda looked at Kanan, eyes reflecting both respect and quiet satisfaction. "Your courage is not only in your actions, Kanan," he said, "but in your heart. That is what allowed us to survive." Kanan nodded, feeling the weight of the words. Knowing that the bond forged in the canyon and the mine would endure beyond the immediate trials, Elias beamed at both of them, understanding, in his own way, that the lesson of trust, bravery, and friendship was something that would guide him for the rest of his life. In the following days, the town slowly returned to normal, but with a newfound sense of connection and respect. The journals and maps revealed resources, safe paths, and the history of the miners who had disappeared, details that allowed the town to flourish where fear had once ruled. The lessons learned from the shadows, from the dangers of the canyon, and from the courage of Kanan and Takoda became stories passed down among the people, a reminder of the power of trust, unity, and bravery in the face of the unknown. Elias spent more time with Takoda, learning skills, listening to stories of the land, and understanding the importance of honor and courage. Kanan helped him understand strategy, awareness, and resilience. Together, they formed a small circle of guidance, a bond that extended beyond their immediate survival and into the shaping of character, wisdom, and a life built on courage. Kanan, who had long wandered alone, began to see the value of roots, not permanent walls or fences, but connections with people built on respect and trust. Takoda, whose life had been dedicated to his people and their survival, found an ally in Kanan, a man whose bravery and insight complemented his own. And Elias, once a boy afraid of shadows and uncertainty, became a symbol of hope, courage, and the lasting impact of one small gesture. The canyon, once foreboding and filled with secrets, now seemed alive with promise. The land had been tested, the danger confronted, and the mysteries revealed. Yet it remained wild and untamed, a reminder that life is never without challenges, but that courage, unity, and friendship can turn uncertainty into opportunity. The town thrived, the people learned to face fears with resolve, and the story of the friendship between Canaan, Dakota, and Elias became legend, whispered around fires and shared in quiet reflection. One evening, as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and crimson, Canaan, Dakota, and Elias stood together on the ridge, overlooking the town. The wind carried the scent of sage and earth, the sound of distant horses, and the calm of a frontier at peace. None laid a hand on Dakota's shoulder, silent acknowledgement passing between them. "We faced it all," Canaan said quietly, "and we survived." Dakota nodded, eyes reflecting both the past and the promise of the future, and the bond we built. "That will endure," he replied. Elias, standing between them, looked up at the two men, understanding that courage, trust, and friendship were stronger than fear or danger. In that moment, the prairie seemed to breathe along with them, the wind carrying away the shadows, leaving behind light, hope, and the enduring power of one small gesture. The story of the mine, the shadows, and the hidden threats had ended not with violence, but with courage, unity, and understanding. Each subplot, the missing miners, the town's fear, the shadowy figures, found its place in the resolution, giving meaning to every action, every choice, and every gesture that had brought them here. And above all, the friendship between Canaan and Dakota, born of trust, respect, and one small act of kindness, became the heart of the story, a testament to what can be achieved when differences are set aside and courage guides the way. The town now bustled with life, free from the uncertainty that had haunted it for so long. Harlan Quinn shared the journals with neighbors, teaching them the history and the lessons within. The sheriff, once overwhelmed, found confidence in the bravery of those who had faced the danger head-on. Elias, no longer just a boy frightened by shadows, became a young man guided by the strength of his mentors, ready to face the future with courage and hope. Canaan and Dakota, standing together on the ridge one last time, watched the sun sink behind the distant hills, their hearts light with the knowledge that they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The land had tested them, the shadows had challenged them, and the unknown had confronted them, but they had endured. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of danger, would remain unbroken, a bond that had begun with a small gesture and had grown into something extraordinary. As the night settled across the prairie, the wind whispered gently through the canyon, carrying the story of courage, trust, and unity. The shadows that had once threatened now lingered only as memory, reminders of the trials overcome. The town, the canyon, and the trio of friends were forever changed, bound together by experience, trust, and the enduring lesson that even the smallest gesture can ignite a friendship strong enough to face any challenge. And so the story of Conan Blackwood, Dakota, and Elias came to its natural close, not with a grand explosion or spectacle, but with courage, understanding, and hope. The frontier had tested them, the shadows had challenged them, and the unknown had confronted them, but through it all, friendship endured. The town flourished, the bond remained unbroken, and the lesson was clear. Courage, trust. One small gesture can change everything. The wind carried the whispers of the past and the promise of the future across the prairie. And in that quiet, powerful moment, the story of one small gesture, one Apache, and a friendship that changed everything reached its full measure, leaving behind hope, inspiration, and the lasting truth that even in the wildest frontier, humanity, courage, and connection will always prevail.